Oh, you don't have Facebook. Yeah. Okay.
I do have Facebook. I just don't go on Facebook.
You just don't go on Facebook. Okay.
Oh, one of those.
I can't bring myself to delete it, but I also can't bring myself to go to it.
Okay. All right. So I have the questions that I want to ask you out here. Okay.
Okay.
And we are actually live right now. I don't know who's watching it because I don't have my Facebook on right now.
And my role in this, am I like co-conspirator, interviewer, commentator?
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
That's what you are. Okay, Mel?
Great. Sounds
okay,
great.
You're okay with that role?
I'm great with that role.
Okay, I'm opening up on Facebook as well, and right now I can see that
I'm just like a blue blank space.
You're just a blue blank space.
But you're such a pretty blue.
Oh yes. If only my eyes were that blue.
Right.
There's 5 people watching. I don't know if that includes us.
It's not me. It doesn't include us.
All right. Hello, 5 people.
Hey, 5 people, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to get to know you and have everyone see how diverse this community is. Right. So let me pull up.
All right, so it's 6 people, and maybe it's slowly going to grow. All right, so Pete, let's get started with a few introductions. But before I do that, I think we have a surprise and very welcome extra guest, which is Mel. Okay. I'm actually going to switch off the Facebook, Mel. Do you think would you advise that, or do I need to have my Facebook on so that we could have people's questions come in?
I'll take care of the questions. You continue.
You'll take care of the questions? Okay, very good. Okay, then I'm going to switch that off because it's kind of distracting for me. I can't handle more than one thing at a time right now. And are you guys able to hear me somewhat synchronously, or is there a time lag?
You sound good to me.
Okay. And Pete?
Good.
Good.
I think there's about like a 5-second delay to Facebook. So people are first telling us where they're coming in from, and I asked that about 5 seconds ago. So we've got Halifax, Canada, and California, and Minneapolis.
Wow.
Awesome.
Very good.
Nice.
A room in a house in Minneapolis. Gary, that's very specific.
Okay.
I'm in a house. Congratulations. That's good.
Hey, Pete, you're not supposed to be rude to my listeners, okay? What's wrong with the house?
I'm in a house right now. I'm in an old school ranch house in Joshua Tree.
Oh, wow.
I took this sequestering thing to a whole nother level. I'm in the middle of nowhere right now.
Mm-hmm.
Are you alone as well?
I am.
Are you going to write your next book out there?
You know, it's funny you say this because I've started a new podcast called Solo, the Single Person's Guide to a Remarkable Life.
Oh.
Can I be on that?
Of course. So, yeah, maybe I will start it.
Okay.
Sounds awesome. Well, you have your first guest. Okay, we've got more people joining. Susan from Ann Arbor, Nina from Perth, Tata from Colombia, living in Brazil. Whoa.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
This is fantastic.
This is amazing. Katie's in a ranch-style house in Austin, Texas. Thank you.
All right. Hey, guys, by the way, those joining in late, we have a surprise, but like I said, very pleasant surprise. A guest, Melanie Weinberger, who is a very good friend of mine from Austin, Texas as well. And I pulled her in because we were having technical difficulties, which continue. As you can see, Pete is just a blue face out there, right? I mean, it's a pretty blue, but nevertheless, it's just blue. You can't see his face. Now, he claims that he's a very good-looking guy, okay? And I can't vouch for it.
I have one good headshot. That's all you need. You only need one good headshot.
Okay, all right. All right. No, actually, I'm just kidding. He's in fact even more handsome, if you can believe it, than me. Okay, even more handsome than me.
We have something in common, and it's
right.
not our intelligence. It's our tall, lean builds.
Exactly. All right, Pete, do you mind if we jump into one or two questions now? Because I don't want to run out of time. We want to
Sure,
give people
let's go.
questions. Okay. And we also want to give, Mel, tell me if this is possible, right? We also want to give people a chance to ask their own questions, and they can type it up in the chat.
Yeah, so if you have questions, as we go, write them in the comments. And when there's one that feels like it'll really serve everyone, I will pause us and call it out.
Wonderful.
That means if your question's good, Mel will ask it.
Cut.
So I'm sorry, guys. I invited you in, telling you that you're going to laugh. It's going to be fun. But really, I mean, we are going to laugh at your expense, it looks like so far. Okay. All right, Pete. So tell me a little bit, okay, about your life. Okay, let's begin there. How did you end up becoming interested in humor?
So, what's that?
Interested in what?
Humor. Okay, he's a humor researcher. Yeah. He's really
a humor researcher.
Oh,
Yes.
you are going to be funny.
Yeah.
No, I study it. There's a difference between studying it and doing it. It's why Raj studies happiness.
Oh yeah, exactly. Right.
So this was something I never set out to do. I think there's these different kinds of luck that exists in the world. Like people talk about you making your own luck, and so on. I think there's a form of luck about kind of paying attention, like paying attention to opportunities and not letting them pass you by. In part because sometimes they're fleeting. And so my story, I'll make it quick, but Raj is familiar with this. So in academia, you'll get invited out. Someone will invite you to the University of Texas. They'll pay for your flight. They'll put you up in a hotel. They'll buy you a nice meal for dinner. You'll have a bunch of meetings through the day. And then for about an hour and a half, you'll stand in front of a group of people and present your early version of your research. And then the audience will just basically tear it apart for that time period. And it's a mildly unpleasant experience. But it's an honor you get to put on your curriculum vitae. So I had this happen to me, and at the time, this was 12 years ago now, I was studying moral psychology, the question of what makes things wrong.
Wow.
And I was presenting a paper about religious marketing, about how churches were behaving like businesses, and how some people found that to be outrageous behavior. And I used a kind of outrageous example of a church that was enticing members of the congregation to come to its winter retreat, and it used a very unusual grand prize in its raffle. So show up to the winter retreat, and you have a chance to win a yellow H2 Hummer SUV. And my audience, they didn't laugh heartily, but they chuckled at that example. And I picked the example because it was entertaining. And a hand went up in the back of the room, and a professor who had been quiet to that moment said to me what ends up being really the most important question ever asked of me, which was, you're trying to make a point that moral violations cause anger and disgust, and yet we're laughing. Why? And I had been studying emotions for about 10 years at that point, and I had no idea how to answer her question. I had never read a paper about it. I had never read a book about it. I had never considered what makes things funny, even though I've told my fair share of good and bad jokes over the years. And I went back home, went back to the University of Colorado, and just puzzled over it and approached a grad student and said, we should write a paper about what makes moral violations funny. When you start thinking about it, plenty of things that go wrong in the world add to a level of levity. We're seeing that right now in terms of people making jokes with this pandemic and so on. And that got me started. I started off as I'm just going to write one paper, and now 12 years later, 2 books, a humor research lab, dozens of boring, dry, esoteric papers later, I get to call myself a humor researcher and be on Facebook Live.
You've made it.
I made it.
All right. Hey, wonderful, Pete. So this leads me to one of the questions that I had for you, which is that how can you stop yourself from crossing over the line from being funny into being offensive? We often find ourselves, I'm sure everyone's had this experience where they made an off-color remark or said something that was supposed to be funny, but somebody took it wrong. Do you have any advice for people that, a kind of quick heuristic that they can use to check in to see if, they can stay within that line?
Yeah. So I'll actually start with if you've already done that, because I've done it. I do it too often, and I study this stuff.
Right.
So my advice for people who have crossed the line is to be quick to apologize.
Love that.
It's just, the thing is, this is that the audience is the arbiter of comedy. They get to decide what's funny and not the person telling the joke. And so if you cross the line and you realize you've crossed the line, I think it's important to say, I'm terribly sorry. I meant that as a joke, and I clearly executed that poorly. Please forgive me.
That's good.
The tendency is to blame the audience.
That's right.
And so how do you not cross the line? Well, the first one is to take into account the audience's perspective and the context the audience is in, and the number of drinks the audience has had. I say that in a cheeky fashion, but the work that we've done in the Humor Research Lab reveals that the things that are funny are wrong yet okay, are threatening yet safe, or as we call them, benign violations, which means you can fail in one of two ways. You can be completely benign, totally okay. A knock-knock joke is often boring for that reason. Or you can be too risque. You can be just wrong, just threatening, just a violation. But the issue is what's wrong and what's okay depends on the perspective, the norms, the culture, the mood of the audience. And so I often find that when you want to tell jokes, you sort of want to tread lightly and kind of test out your audience to know, are they going to find what you think is funny actually funny?
Right. That's good.
I have a question.
Go for
Am I
it.
allowed to have a question?
Yeah, of course.
Have you guys researched what funny feels like?
What it feels like? Wow, that's interesting. I have not. Now, what we talk about, one of the things that academics, nerds like us have to do is we have to be very clear about what things are and what they're not. And so we talk about humor having these three elements, having a behavioral element, laughter, this communication that what you just said or what you did is amusing. This emotional experience, amusement, this positive emotion that we have, and then a cognitive reaction, which is a judgment, like, wow, that's funny. That's there. I don't know of any work per se that has sought to, besides like a little bit of neuroscience work, to sort of differentiate the positive emotion of amusement from other positive emotions per se. I will tell you this, is that the humor tends to be high arousal. That is, that it's not like, like contentment is positive, but low arousal. Amusement is more joyous, more delightful. There. I actually be curious what Raj has to say about that, because I don't know much about it beyond that arousal dimension being very important.
Yeah. So there is this book, I forget the name of the book, by Robert Provine. It's called Laughter, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
And in that, I read it a long time back, and they do make the argument that laughter is its own category of happiness or positivity. That's quite different from the other ones, and I can't remember the details anymore. So.
Certainly as a communication tool, laughter has some unique elements to it, right? For example, it's cross-cultural. So very few, like language-wise, very few things cross cultures. You have to rely on understanding the language. Facial expressions do generally, but vocalizations typically don't. So if you ask people, what's if you what's the word for amazing, in another language, you can't tell it means amazing if you're an English speaker. But when someone laughs, they sound just like you and me.
Right.
And that's really striking. Here's how striking it is. And non-human primates, chimps, bonobos, apes, and so on, when engaged in tickling and play fighting, their form of laughter is what's called play panting. And it's like this ha 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 kind of sound. What's fascinating is that the closer genetically humans are to these different primates, the more similar the laughter is.
That's cute.
I know. And this is really fascinating. There's even evidence that rats have their own form of play panting or laughter.
Wow.
You can't pick it up with the human ear, but you can with like an ultrasonic sensor. If you end up, when this is over, go to YouTube and type in tickling rats. And you can find these it was one of the most important videos I've ever seen. This researcher, Robert Provine, will sort of jostle and tussle these rats with his hands, like flip them over and rub their bellies. And they make this sort of chirping sound. And when they study it, they find that it's associated with positive emotion. And then the other thing that's just incredible is he'll move his hand to the other side of the cage, and the rats will chase after the hand and try to kind of put themselves underneath it to recreate the experience.
Aww.
This is not unlike when you have a professor that you think's funny, and at the end of the semester, you say to him, "Hey, Raj, do you teach any other classes?"
Okay, well, this leads me to now think, like, then plants must laugh. Like, do leaves, can you tickle a leaf?
That's an interesting question. So I don't know the answer to that. So I think there's like a lot of people who think that comedy, that humor is limited to human beings because we tend to think about irony and satire and so on. But the roots of comedy are in physical play, are in play fighting and tickling and so on.
Oh.
My guess is any mammal that engages in play fighting experiences humor and has their own sort of form of communicating that. So I like to say, like, if you ask dog owners, does your dog have a sense of humor?
Yeah.
They'll say definitely. Cat owners, I'm not sure. But so my question is like, do reptiles have this? I don't know of anyone who's done this work, but I think that there's your question about, can plants experience humor? My guess is probably no, because there's no evolutionary benefit of play fighting with plants. But my guess is that anywhere there's an evolutionary benefit of play fighting, you're going to find some version of humor in that species, right? So I hear birds in the background, and so I wonder, like, I don't know of anyone who's done this work. The fascinating thing about research on humor is that although it's an age-old question, it actually goes all the way back to ancient Greek philosophy, maybe even before that, but certainly till then. Even though it's like this long-standing question, it's been surprisingly understudied, given its importance in the world. And my hunch, so Raj had mentioned, I think it's a really lovely book called Laughter by the recently deceased Robert Provine. It hasn't been the topic of mainstream research, in part, and this has been my experience, is because it seems frivolous at first. It doesn't seem like the kind of topic that serious science should be dissecting, and yet it's ubiquitous. It drives our entertainment and consumption decisions. It drives our romantic decisions. It's also the cause of a great deal of strife. That is, that it can be used to bully people. It can, even well-intentioned, as Raj's question indicated, can be hurtful.
Yeah.
And so I feel lucky that I stumbled on this 12 years ago. I'm so lucky that person asked that question. I'm so lucky that I was paying enough attention to realize there was an opportunity there.
And now you're super lucky to be on Facebook Live.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
on happy
Okay.
smarts.
All right, Pete. So you and I are in the business school. So let me kind of ask you a businessy question, okay? What can we learn from comedians? What can business people learn from comedians? Again, related to that, what can we learn from comedians about dealing with the problems caused by the epidemic? So two-part question, okay? What can business people learn, and what can we all learn from comedians about dealing with the stress of the coronavirus outbreak?
Okay. So it's as if I fed you that question.
Oh, actually, I just checked my email. In fact, there is an email from you along those lines.
No, what's interesting is I'm a psychologist by training. I study decision making and emotions. I found myself in a business school doing research on emotions and decision making. I now teach MBAs, all over the world now, and I love teaching. I love teaching my marketing management course in particular. And I've always sort of looked to see how can I unite my day job, teaching business students, and my night job decoding comedy.
Mhm.
And my first instinct, and this is actually a lesson in of itself. So what'll happen is when the sketch writers on Saturday Night Live pitch sketches to Lorne Michaels, the longtime producer of Saturday Night Live, he'll often reject a sketch idea, even if it's funny. And what he'll say is, that's the first premise idea, meaning that's the same idea the audience would come up with. And he pushes his writers to come up with second, third premises, etc.
Mhm.
So I have a new book called Shtick to Business, and one of the lessons in there is called Third Thoughts.
Mhm.
And the idea is that creative thoughts often come from persistence,
Mhm.
from really, oftentimes the best predictor of a good idea is the number of bad ideas that you come up with en route to that
So
good
this is
idea.
kind of like
Oh.
counterintuitive at some level, right? You would think that the funny ideas kind of strike you spontaneously,
That's
and
right. Yes.
but you're actually
But
saying that it's like any other idea. You have to kind of build on it.
you have to work on it. Yeah.
Mhm.
So my first premise was to write a book about making leaders funny, the
Mhm.
benefits of humor in the workplace. And then I gave a talk a few times about it. So again, I like to say the comics that vaudeville was the first lean startup.
Mhm.
So what's all the rage in business is this idea of fail fast, be agile, make something, test market product fit, and then pivot as needed.
Mhm.
So I started giving this talk about humor and leadership, and I just started to get cold feet
Mhm.
whenever I wanted to give it. And the reason was, if let's say I was giving a talk to 200 people,
Mhm.
well, of those 200 people, there's probably like 50 who are like really funny, good at comedy.
Mhm.
And then there's like 100 who are just kind of so-so. And then there's another 50 that are just terrible at it, And of those 50, there's like 5 that are truly awful.
Right.
And the idea being that if I went out and told 200 people to be funnier at work,
Mhm.
I actually, on balance, make the workplace worse. Right? And so then I had this insight. My second premise was, don't try to be funny.
Yeah.
Learn to think funny. That is, learn to think differently.
Mhm.
And these comedians have such a difficult job, one
Mhm.
that, by the way, they make look easy,
Mhm.
that we can learn about their creative process by mimicking them. Not
Mhm.
mimicking their output, but mimicking their process.
Right.
So what I say is, leaders, don't try to be funny.
Mhm.
Try to be more innovative. And so I can give you tons of lessons about how to do that. I just gave you one, which is about the value of persistence in problem solving.
Mhm.
We have a tendency to think of creative ideas coming as a bolt of
Yeah.
lightning.
Yeah.
But usually they come from just a iterative process of working on something, taking a break, working on something, taking a break, working on something.
Right. I mean, you might get a flash, but the flash depends on you having put in a lot of thought before. And it kind of like
Absolutely.
exercised by the subconscious, perhaps, and it just comes out as a flash. So it seems like it came out of nowhere, but really, I mean, had you not put in that work up front, then the flash wouldn't have occurred to you, right?
Yes. So to your part of your question about the pandemic, I mean, obviously, this is for most people, unprecedented experience. Being asked to stay in your homes, to see what's happening to the economy, that it's putting people's livelihoods at risk. It's challenging from a relationship standpoint. It's just a scary, uncertain time.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is that comics really thrive during times like this, right? So Mitch Hedberg, the great Mitch Hedberg, one of I think the funniest joke writers ever, had this saying which the more I F up, the better my career goes. and what happens is, so for example, Richard Pryor, in a psychotic induced state from freebasing cocaine, lights himself on fire, nearly dies, and turns that experience into a stand-up special and a feature film.
Wow!
Right?
Okay. I did not know this. I just saw his Netflix. 1978 Los Angeles stand-up comedy.
Yeah, so he talks about his troubles with drug addiction. He also has a movie called JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling. My point is that comics are really good at thriving in chaos, and most of us are not.
True.
And one of the reasons why comics are good at thriving in chaos is they're really good at improvising. They're outstanding improvisers. And right now, the world demands a lot of improvisation. And unfortunately, schools don't teach improvisation.
True.
And most businesses are not built on improvisation. Most businesses are built on rules and standard operating procedures. Well, those are all out the window right now. So what are some of the rules of improv that could be useful in moments like this? I'll give you two quick ones.
Okay.
The first one is this notion that Del Close, he's one of the fathers of improv and Second City and so on, says is that we are all supporting actors. So if you're on an improv team, you are taught that you are not the star, and your job is to make everyone else the star.
I love
well,
that.
if you have what's that?
It's a great metaphor for life.
It's a great metaphor for life.
Right. Are Mel and I making you feel like a star, Pete, even though we can't see you?
Yes. So the idea is that if I'm trying to make you a star and you're trying to make me a star, well, at some point in an improv show, one of us is going to become a star.
Right.
And so if you see an improv show, you'll often experience that. You'll be like, wow, that one guy, boy, he was so funny. He is so much better than everyone else. Yeah. He should ditch these clowns and head to LA and become the next Melissa McCarthy.
Yeah.
The problem is if you go to the show the next week, this other person, you're like, wow, that woman, what a star she is. She should ditch these clowns, right? And the idea is that improv is set up for someone to surface, but for them to surface, you have to be serving others. Now, this is very easy to see in a world where people are struggling. If your first instinct is to say, how can I help others? How can I help other family members? How can I help my friends? How can I help my peers? How can I help my subordinates? How can I help my boss? You can see how that rule of improv is going to be super useful.
It's awesome. So I'm getting so many of these thoughts right now. So two thoughts I'll share with you guys is that happiness is like humor in the sense that it too was trivialized. Maybe it's just a little bit, I don't know, the cycle for happiness is a little more mature, and maybe laughter's turn is going to come now, right? Because happiness was poo-pooed as well as a subject that's too trivial and so on, and it's caught on a big time now. The other thing that I wanted to say is that this is a kind of a little bit, far away from the topic of happiness. But if you think about groups of single men, right, who end up being attractive at a nightclub, for example, right? They support each other rather than bring down each other, right? I mean, the idea of being the alpha male or whatever is very attractive, and so in general, I think that maybe it doesn't happen that often. But to the extent that the men can kind of support each other, I'm sure that the same thing happens for women as well, right? If you go out in a group, the more you build on each other and support each other, the more attractive as a group you are. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, there's this, when I first started studying humor, I would do these little video interviews with people. And there's this British comedian named Matt Kirshen. And he talked about, and we wrote about it in the Humor Code in my first book, this idea of comedy as a conspiracy. The idea is that some of the best comedy comes from this idea that we're all in this together. And he tells this story about this comic who would, he had this joke he would tell, but before he would tell the joke, he'd kind of sit on the stool and he'd kind of lean in and look at the audience, and he would say, kind of look over his shoulder, and he would say, the club owner doesn't want me to tell this joke, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Right? And what Matt said was like, the joke wasn't that funny, but it always got huge laughs because it had this uniting function. Now everybody in the room was in on it.
Right.
And I think that there is really something, when you talk about like living your best life, and trying to thrive, especially trying to thrive in uncertain times, whether it be the uncertainty of approaching someone and asking them for a date, whether it be to ask for a raise, whether it be to be able to say, I just don't know what I should be doing right now, in the face of these uncertain times. Having other people there to support you, to give you advice, to encourage you, to tell them, to say, hey, didn't work out for you, but I'm proud of you. I think all of those things are incredibly important for thriving. At the outset of this, I said that I have this new project about single living. One of the things that I often talk about, I use this term solo but not alone. And that single people, first of all, aren't as unhappy as you might think that they should be, given the mythology of marriage. But part of the reason why single people thrive, when they do thrive, is they're actually more interconnected than married people. They have more friends, they have more connections, they're more likely to volunteer, and so on. And so I think your instinct about the connections to comedy and to connection are right on.
Okay, wonderful. So, Pete, you're single. Is this a good time to advertise the fact that you're single? Mel, you're too, right?
I'm out in the middle. Yep. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm living a monk adjacent life right now.
Okay, I don't mean this exact moment, Pete. Like in the coming weeks. Okay, now I want to turn around a little bit and ask Mel if she has any questions. And Mel has been kind of monitoring the comments that are coming in, and if there are any questions from the people. I have a couple of questions, but I think it's a good time to kind of make it a little more interactive. So Mel.
Yeah. Well, for me, what I'm curious about, or what would be interesting to talk about, is the correlation between laughter and healing. Like when people say laughter is the best medicine. And I think that is something that makes comedy even more, there's more desire for it in times like these. And I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so I like being asked this question because I get to sound smart. So the benefits of, so first of all, there's 4 benefits to comedy as I see it. So the first one is actually laughter is good for the body. It has a kind of mild health benefit to it.
Yeah. Did you know there was something called a laughter yoga club? There still is.
I've done laughter yoga.
Oh, you have? Shall we do it right now? Let's all remotely laugh for just 20.
So the idea behind laughter yoga for your listeners or viewers is you get together with a group of people and you begin fake laughing.
Exactly.
And then what happens is it naturally turns into, what's called non-Duchenne laughter, fake laughter, then gets transformed into Duchenne laughter, which is the true joyous laughter that's there. And people will throw laughter bombs, they'll lob a laughter bomb in the air, and then when it hits the ground, everybody will crack up laughing and so on. Right. It's incredibly awkward to start, I'll be honest.
Right.
but you walk out feeling wonderful.
Right.
And so that's a
So
nice example.
I don't mind starting it, but I would like to be off camera though.
I'm an easy laugh, so we can do it,
Yeah, but we can't hear the other people, that's the problem.
That's too bad.
True.
Yeah.
Hey,
But,
everyone listening, if you have a question you've been wanting to ask, now's the time to pop it in, and we'll see it in just a few seconds and start to get
Okay.
at them.
Right, and while you do that, I think Pete should finish up. Right, he talked about one, which is
So the first one is laughter has this health benefit. It's mild, but it's positive. The second one is the amusement, the positive emotion associated with laughter has very clear benefits, both emotional and psychological. And Raj knows this from his class. So the benefits of positive emotion to things like immune functioning, creativity, and so on is indisputable. And so in that way, the more comedy in your life, the better off you are from a health and well-being standpoint. The next one is, I think, the one that often people talk about when they talk about laughter is the best medicine, which is if I can laugh in the face of tragedy, can I actually cognitively transform that tragedy into something less tragic? So if I can make
You're not talking
jokes,
about the kind of laughter that Joker in the movie had.
no,
right?
I'm talking about making jokes about bad things.
Right. I mean, kind of seeing the lighter side of things.
Yes, indeed. So when someone, so I wrote a paper called about humorous complaining, right? So a complaint is basically is communicating your dissatisfaction with something. Well, a humorous complaint is communicating your dissatisfaction with something in a way that is amusing to others. And so if you can make jokes about the bad weather, the bad traffic, the pandemic, being shut at home, whatever that might be, then does it actually change the way you perceive that thing? So you no longer now see, right? Because so much of life is how we construe what's happening to us, right? So one of the things that I always talk about is, when someone says something's bad, like I'm stuck at home, the comedic reversal is say, good. Now you can clean out your garage. Now you can spend more time with family. Now you can learn to cook. If someone says, "Oh, my business is in the toilet," I say, "Good. Your business wasn't doing that well to begin with. This is your time to retool and rebrand." Right?
Are you speaking to me, Pete?
It's time to revamp this class, Raj. And then the last one, and I think the last one is related to your observation earlier, which is we like funny people.
Yeah.
Funny people are easy to support. So when you're struggling, like the friend who's hard to support is this one. You call him and you say, "Raj, how you doing?" You're like, "Oh my God, my day was terrible." Call him the next day. "Raj, how you doing?" "My day was just awful." Right? And day after day after day, it becomes hard to call that friend, even though the friend needs the help.
Yeah.
But if you call your friend and they say, "Oh my God, my day was awful. Let me tell you this hilarious story about how it was." That friend becomes easier to call. And thus it's counterintuitive, right? The person who's able to make the jokes may actually be doing better, but they're also easy to support. And the psychological research on social support is like, it's so important for our health and well-being to have people support us. And so that's why I like to say comedy is good. You laugh, it feels good. The positive emotions are good for you. The cognitive appraisals change. And you're just better company, and when you're better company, you have the kind of benefits of the calls and support that you want.
Of all the things that he shared with us, Pete, I think that's maybe the most important one to me. And I'm just thinking of all my friends, and it's true. The friends that can, even when they're going through a bad patch, like one of the guys, he lost his passport when he was traveling abroad. Okay, but he made fun of it, even though he was in serious, strife, in a bad situation, but he made fun of it, and that just made me want to call him and support him, and I helped him out in the end. But yeah, it's so true. And like anybody here who's listening in, if you're having a particularly bad time because of coronavirus, because of anything else, if you can just remember this, I think that's really going to stand you in good stead.
There's one other quick thing. I think it's helpful to also know that those people who lack a sense of humor when things are bad are harder to support. It can lead you to make the call when you might be reluctant, because frankly, that person needs it even more.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, we have an interesting question. Tata asks, would you mind to make an example joke about narcissism and its awful consequences and how to approach that?
That's interesting. Okay, so
so the question is, can you make
yeah, I think the issue is this. Okay, so I think you're talking about someone else who's narcissistic, not you're the narcissist. I will tell you this. If you are the narcissist, I know what you need to do, and that is you need to start making jokes, self-deprecating jokes.
Oh, that's a good
One
idea.
of the great cures for narcissism is to make fun of yourself. That's there, right? Like suddenly you become a lot more approachable. You become a little more sympathetic, and so on.
But it's like, isn't it tough? I mean, we discussed this phenomenon of, if you're going through a bad patch, have a sense of humor about it, and people will support you. And it's tough to do it, right? If you're the type of person who likes to worry and is anxious all the time, then you can't see the lighter side. So
it's hard to do.
Likewise for a narcissist, isn't it tough for them to be self-deprecating?
It is, I'm sure. Yeah, that's the catch-22 here, right? If you could be self-deprecating, maybe you wouldn't be a narcissist. I mean, my advice for Tata is if you have a narcissistic person in your life, I hate to say this, but the best way to deal with a narcissistic person is to distance yourself from that narcissistic person. The research on this, I think, is pretty clear, which is we have a tendency to believe that adding is a good way to solve problems, but oftentimes subtracting is a good way to solve problems. So like you could add 5 more good people in your life, and that has the same effect of removing one negative person.
That's very good.
Yeah.
So Pete, is that why you're in the middle of nowhere?
I don't want to.
You should put him in the humor lab and put all the wires on him. And
well done. Well done.
Okay. All right.
We're getting happiness questions.
Okay.
That are, I don't know if Raj, this is more for you, or if Pete, this is for you. Thoughts about happiness when you're in a relationship. I feel like sometimes when you're in a relationship, your happiness can be dependent on your partner.
Raj, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can say something that I think is not going to be terribly insightful at this point, but we can begin there, which is that, of course, people's emotions are very contagious. And so if you're around somebody who's happy, it's definitely going to affect your mood. And I think that that's maybe the mediating reason why it's easier to talk to somebody who can see the lighter side of things. At some level, even though they're going through a bad patch, they're able to kind of rise above it themselves, and they're making it lighter on you as well. And so you don't feel that there's going to be that emotional baggage in dealing with them, right? So they're not affecting you negatively with their negativity. Would you agree with that?
I do. There's one of my favorite papers in psychology, and ironically, it's a correlational paper. So I don't know how much Raj has taught you about being careful about interpreting correlations causally. But
hey, Pete, this is not a PhD class.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in this paper, it's so one of the authors on it is Dr. Keltner, whose work I'm sure you folks have talked about a bit. But what they do in this paper is they have judges judge the authenticity of smiles of young women in their yearbook photos.
Wow.
So this idea, we've talked about Duchenne and non-Duchenne. So Duchenne smiles are true smiles, and non-Duchenne smiles are the smiles you put on Instagram. And so what they found was that a woman's likelihood of having a Duchenne smile in this photo many years later correlated with a whole bunch of positive outcomes in her life. Satisfaction with work, happiness in relationships, and so on, both personal and professional. I think that there's an interesting lesson in this, and when it comes to relationships, which is you get to choose. Unlike your family, you get to choose your life partner, you get to choose your friends, and so on. And while sometimes like kind of surly, negative people can be interesting, they sometimes can be difficult to be long-term partners with. And so all things equal, if you can pick someone in your life who sort of laughs easily, smiles easily, finds the lighter, brighter side of things, just because they're dispositionally a positive person, you're going to get those contagious effects that Raj was talking about. In the same way that if you can choose someone who has a sense of humor that you share, they're able to transform the violations in life into benign violations and lead to laughs in a way that I think really ends up being important. And so I think the person who asked that question is thinking in the right way. And basically, I know you two can't say it. I'm going to say it. Break up with that person. Okay. That person's not making you happy. Find someone who makes you happier.
So, Pete, I mean, sorry, but I mean, that seems, oh, that was a joke?
I was half serious.
Okay, you're half serious. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was like wondering if that's maybe a little too harsh, right? Because, yeah. I mean, first of all,
I'm half serious. Look, I will tell you this. This pandemic is, if it's not causing you, the listener, to think about your life, the economics of your life, your career, your relationships, your health, it ought to be. Right? Because if you can't make it through a pandemic with someone, maybe they're not the right partner for you.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I would want to know a little more.
I know. I'm not telling them to really break up. I'm just saying.
Okay. Yeah. By the way, Sandrine, thank you very much for saying that. Appreciate it. And for those who are tuning in, Sandrine, if you've taken Heroic, Happier Employees and Return on Investment course, you know that she was one of the collaborators on it. And it's great that she's tuned in. And if you're happy, you don't know about the course, you don't know what you're missing. You don't know that you're missing Sandrine. Okay, go check it out. All right. Mel, over to you. Any other questions?
What is one thing we can all do to help those around us feel funny when they're first getting started trying?
Yeah, can you make other people feel funny? Can you make them feel that they're funny?
Well, the question is, should you, right? Like that's the thing is, like, if you politely laugh, like this is the problem with bosses. Bosses think they're funny because their employees politely laugh at their dumb jokes.
Yeah.
Right, and you're encouraging it, and then you can't hear the end of it because they're going on because they think they think that you think they're funny, right?
Yes.
But like yoga laughter, right? I mean, it starts out being not real laughter, but it ends up being real laughter. Can you kind of fool yourself at some level by complimenting another person that they're funny into believing that the jokes are actually funny later on?
I would say this. I think if you wanted to try to encourage, so I happen to believe that everybody's funny if you can find the right audience and the right medium.
Oh, I love that.
Right? So I think there's a lot of people who aren't comfortable being funny in front of a crowd, for example, but they'll send you a hilarious text message. And so I think some of it is to guide the person and to give them honest feedback about when they're doing well, and then being kind, compassionate, when they're not. Now,
so like, no, not funny. I love you.
You're like, no, it's a good try. But the one advice I like is I'm a big fan of improv. For the reasons we've discussed already, which is I think that the lessons and rules of improv are great for creating comedy out of nothing, but they're also great for living a robust life. And so I think that there's someone who wants to work on being funnier. I think that doing getting them to go with them to an improv class
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
is a really one. First of all, I will tell you this: an improv class is 3 hours of play, and as adults, we just don't play enough.
Yeah,
we don't
true.
play enough board games. We don't. We lose that as we as we become adults and become too serious. And the nice thing about improv is
in the last month, my family and I have played more board games than we have played in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years.
Don't you feel great when you're done? Yeah. Even if you haven't won, it's still such a good time.
I mean, that's very rare for me not to win, but yeah.
I mean, of course,
Okay. Oh, sorry. Maya just gave a sweet comment. She said, I laugh at someone's effort to be funny, especially children. And I can get that.
That's cute. Yes, that's really wonderful.
That's right.
I mean, I certainly think that encouraging children to be funny is good, because what it helps children do is it helps children recognize boundaries and which ones are okay to bend and break, along the way. I mean, comedy is about violating norms and transgressing in ways that are okay. Right? So if you want to raise a creative, robust child, you should not be stifling that kid's sense of humor. Right?
Even if it comes at a bit of a risk that they're going to be perhaps offending a few of their friends or something like that, right?
I think so. Yeah. I think trying to stifle a child's sense of humor in order to make an adult feel comfortable is a mistake.
Right.
That's well said. I mean, there are a lot of parents homeschooling right now for the first time in their lives. And I know that that's been a lot to manage. So maybe there's something here for parents to do with their kids, to have some improv and encourage laughter with each other.
Oh, that's a nice idea. I actually think, I think that if you're a parent and you're trying to, first of all, I get to say this comfortably because I'm not a parent. Which is like,
you're single.
I think if you're a parent and you're having to homeschool, first of all, you should write all your children's teachers a thank you note first. Secondly, I think if you try to just approach this as like, okay, we're going to do reading, writing, and arithmetic, you're in trouble. Like if you can make this like play, if you can be playful and kind of gamify this stuff, you're going to have, you and your child are going to be better off as a result of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. I was just going to say, I try to gamify my work. Or like break it up into chunks where it's like this. When I think about all of it, I'm overwhelmed. If I can just take the one piece and make it, I kind of time chunk it and go, how fun can I make this 1 hour to do this one thing?
That's great.
Yeah.
When you're talking about advice for the pandemic, I'm going to pull one from this new book, which is a counterintuitive one and one that people don't always like to hear. But I like to talk about the value of writing and how important writing is to the creative process. But also, like, this is an extraordinary time. I encourage people to start journaling.
Yeah.
And the value of a journal is it's a written record of your thoughts, feelings, and actions during a time that you can revisit at that later time and learn from. I also think there's a benefit. For example, if you're considering a career change, I think you should write about what you think that career change should be. And because there's a precision that's necessary in writing that you often don't have with thinking. Your ideas can be loose when you speak them.
True.
So my gamification is I like to now. So I talked about there's three values of writing. One is recording, which I just talked about. The other one is clarifying, and the last one is communicating. Right. So writing a blog post, writing an email, writing a book. Writing a one sheet for your next project, whatever that might be. In some of those cases, you're trying to communicate to others. Well, the best way to communicate with others is to trim the fat. So one of the games I like to play is the 10% rule. So if I've written something, I try to cut 10% of the words off of it before I share it with someone.
I like that.
And then it becomes this sort of puzzle. It's like a search and destroy game that you can play with your writing, which is like, oh my God, I don't need that word. Done. I don't need that word. Oh, I don't need this whole sentence, So that's my gamification. That's how much of a nerd I am.
That's kind of related to this idea that you have to kind of work towards being funny, coming up with a creative idea. And in a similar way, if you want to clarify things in your own head, if you want to decide, whether you want to change careers, it's a big move. And you might think that I have all the clarity of thought in my head. Why do I need to write it? But in the process of writing it, you actually gain more clarity in ways that you wouldn't be able to guess, right?
In Stick to Business, I have this special contributor. His name's Shane Moss. He's a comedian. And he says he likes to, so, Hemingway had this saying about write drunk, edit sober. And his saying, Shane's saying is, I write long and I speak short. So he writes out lots and lots and lots, fills pages and pages of ideas and looking for that one idea that can become one joke. And the idea is that oftentimes the creative process is a little messy. And it's certainly not, it's not like it's portrayed in the movies.
Okay, so hang on, Pete. I wanted to say something about it, but I just got to know that Mel's got to go soon. And so thank you very much, Mel, for joining us. And for those who are surprised to see her, that's because she's so much better looking than Pete is. Okay,
she is.
It was fun being here today, guys. Thank you for letting me pop in and play with you.
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. Maybe I'll share the story after you leave, Mel. But anyway, Mel is here because this is the first time that I'm doing a Facebook Live event, and she's done so many that she's an expert. I just sought her advice on this, and we had last minute trouble, believe it or not. And so I had to kind of like in an emergency call her, and she was very kind to kind of guide me through this. And she just happened to be there, and I said, please stay on because, I don't know if I was going to need
How
help.
very improvisational of you, Mel.
Oh,
way to yes
you.
and this.
I did.
Well done.
It. Thank you very much. Yep.
Right. So think of this, okay? Mel can be so charming, so articulate, without any preparation, right? So think of how good she can be when she's prepared. And she's prepared for tomorrow night, right? Is there an event tomorrow night, Mel?
Oh, yeah. I have an event tomorrow night. I'm having a growth party. It is an online growth party. And think of it like a TED Talk followed by a live stream dance party.
Oh, wow.
And we have relationship expert John Howard talking about the science of relationships.
Okay. Very good. So I'm going to send over a link to everybody on Happy Smarts for that event. And Mel, if you could just email it to me, I'll post it on Facebook.
Okay. All right. Love you all. Mwah.
Adios. Bye-bye.
Adios.
Cheers.
Take care. Yeah. All right, Pete. It's just you and I now.
All right.
Okay.
This is going to be difficult.
Yeah. So we don't have a whole lot of time. We have like 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay.
So Asma, the way that we can attend is I'm going to send you guys a link to it on Facebook, Happy Smarts, and you'll be able to able to go to the event through that link. Okay. All right. So Stacy has a question, and her question is: do you think it makes a difference if you write in a journal as opposed to type on a computer?
Stacy, thank you for asking that question. I think it matters.
Okay.
So, so there's some of this is based on research, and some of this is based upon experience. So there's some research that suggests that note-taking with pen and paper is superior for memory than typing on a computer. And part of the reason for that is that writing forces you to synthesize, where when you type on a computer, you transcribe. And so in that way, from a record-keeping standpoint, especially from a study standpoint, handwriting is better. Now, my intuition, so the downside of writing with pen and paper is that you risk losing your notebook.
Not just that, I think that, it's just more effortful, I think, nowadays. Right?
It's more work.
Yeah.
But what I think happens is when you write by hand, is it slows down your thinking.
Yeah.
And it makes you put in the most important things. Right. And it gives you a chance that as your hand is moving, it allows your mind to work on other things.
True.
And it also has a nonlinearity that typing doesn't have. which is you can underline, you can circle, you can put something in the margin, you can point an arrow to it, you can put an exclamation point, you can pause and doodle, and so on. And I think that from a creative standpoint, that nonlinearity and this sort of slowing down your thinking, like we're always going 100 miles an hour. So I think that the benefit of writing with, and also, by the way, when you write with hand, it's fine if your handwriting is terrible, as long as you can read your own handwriting.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And so I think the risk of losing a journal is worth the reward. Right. So I mentioned Mitch Hedberg. So Mitch Hedberg, wife only saw him cry once, and it was when he lost his notebook.
I see.
Wow. But I'm old school though, like I'm spending the pandemic not watching TV, but rather playing vinyl. Like I'm trying to be disconnected. The other problem with writing on your computer is you're just so tempted to check Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Like when you just sit when you just sit in the sun and write in a journal, or lay down on your couch, or sit on the floor and drink a cup of coffee and write in your journal, there's something just disconnected and so old school about that I think is useful. That's my opinion. I'd be curious what you think, Raj.
I actually, I have my students write in a journal in my class, and I do not know much about the research on the differences between maintaining it kind of in a hard copy versus online. And I do know that journaling of any kind is actually better than not journaling. And I'm afraid that I'm going to lose a few of them if I insist that they do it in a handwritten format. So I just ask them to keep it wherever it's convenient for them. But I bring my own journal, which happens to be handwritten. Okay. By the way, this is actually a good point to kind of maybe ask you the last question, because we are just over an hour right now. And I would like to end it at this point, just to not stretch it beyond 8:30. So I'm going to offer you a choice. Okay, I'm going to offer you a choice between reading from your journal, your latest entry. Okay.
Oh my God. Okay.
Or cracking a joke that makes everybody laugh. Okay. So let's go.
Well, okay. I'm going to go with the joke, in part because I'd have to find my journal here.
Okay.
I won't. Let's just say, so I turned 50 yesterday.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't have guessed. You look not a day older than 55. Oh,
thank you so much. I turned 50 yesterday in the desert, and let's just say that I did some deserty things. So I should probably not read from my journal.
Okay.
But I'm going to tell you a joke, but Raj, I need your help with this joke. Okay?
Sure.
And we'll see how this goes. This works better live.
Okay.
So Raj, I want you to ask me, what is the secret to good comedy?
Okay. Pete, can you tell me what's the secret?
Timing.
What?
I said timing. Sorry, everyone. It's a terrible joke, but I love telling that joke.
I like it. Okay. Good. On that note, guys, thank you so much for joining us. And I wasn't on Facebook. Mel was helping me with all the questions, but I do see a sidebar of comments and everything. I really apologize for not acknowledging each one of you, but it was so beautiful to have all of you. And hopefully you got a few insights from this, and maybe had a few laughs as well. And I really like it. This is my very first Facebook Live event, and Pete told me it's his first as well. Pete, did you like it?
I did. Yeah, I wish we could get the video working, unfortunately. But as I say, I have a face for radio.
Right. Yeah. So, and you look very handsome there, Pete. With the blue screen, it looks beautiful. I love it. Okay. You're not going to be single for too long, I can tell you that. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for joining me, guys. And all the best with everything that you're doing. And stay connected. Okay. I will send you a link to Mel's event tomorrow. And then I like this. So I think I'm going to do it again. Okay. So see you soon. Bye-bye.
Fabulous.
All right. Adios.
Adios. Cheers. Bye-bye.